Hi, everyone. We are here with another episode of the LGB Alliance USA podcast. I'm Ariane.
I'm Elise.
I'm Kai.
Sylvia.
And I'm T.
And this evening, what we're going to discuss is actually a topic that has been on a lot of our minds. That's sort of this question of purity politics. So one issue that anyone who's involved in a particular hot button social issue knows is the question of building coalitions and building friends and knowing where to draw the line about who to include in your coalition and who not to include. And, setting boundaries for what exactly you think is acceptable rhetoric, acceptable dialogue, and what isn't. And one thing that came to mind in particular, as someone who spends a lot of time in social media, is simply things like what sort of things to retweet, what sort of things to repost on Instagram. What if the person that you're retweeting or posting turns out to have a really great moment, a really great tweet, but then it turns out that they have said a lot of other things on their profile that are pretty dang problematic and a lot of people don't like. So I'm opening up the floor to discussion if anyone wants to chime in with something that's been on this topic that's really been bothering them or they want to talk about.
So I want to jump on what you just said about the Instagram or Twitter or X or whatever. I have a question about Instagram. So you know how you can have multiple posts on like a slide and there can be up to like 10 of them? Sometimes I'll see the first slide and I'll think it's really funny and then I like it, but then I swipe through and I see some problematic shit or maybe an advertisement for something and I will unlike it. I'm wondering what the ratio is for, like, if I like 4 out of the 5 slides, but I really disagree with one of the slides, I will unlike the thing because I don't want to condone that one topic. But I don't know. I'm wondering if that's too extreme, or like, if I dislike 4 out of the 5 slides, but then one of them is like, I've never seen something so accurate in my life, I want to like this. It's such an odd moral dilemma. What do y'all do in that situation? Do you like it or do you unlike it?
I think for me, it depends on really how much the problematic or controversial aspect of it outweighs what I like about it. I think it really depends post for post, but I've more times than I can count had that situation occur too, where like I really like something about this, but then I get further, I go to their actual timeline or I slide through slides on Instagram and I'm like, ooh, maybe not. And I've like sat on posts for a minute and gone, do I leave the like there or do I take it back? Like, what do I do? And I think it just outweighs like how problematic is this thing that is problematic.
How would you define problematic?
If we're talking about LGB activism things, if we're talking about a post that pertains to that, I think really I've actually gotten a lot more hardlined with things like that. If there's anything in it that refers to the gay community as a whole, as queer, I will unlike the post. If there is anything like if we are starting to call males who identify as women lesbians at any point anywhere on, I'm done. Like, so I think like there's stuff like that that's like a hard line, absolutely not, we're not going to play this game. And then there's stuff that is a little bit more gray, and it kind of depends like how prominent it is, I guess.
So if I'm hearing you correct, Elise, you're giving examples of where you think that the person, you're very reluctant to endorse content from people who you think are too sort of, for lack of a better term, wishy-washy or mealy-mouthed about where exactly they're standing. I've had similar discussions about that with people, not necessarily LGB people, but people who are also involved in sort of gender critical activism, where there's some people who will get very upset at anyone who uses, so-called preferred pronouns. Like they insist that they'll only go by sex-based pronouns. And for me, I understand that this is an issue where different people kind of set different, there are different sort of social circumstances, and different people have different sort of calculuses for determining how to handle pronouns. So for me, I tend to cut people slack on pronouns. But then there are other things where it's like, okay, well, is this person seemingly throwing people under the bus for using sex-based pronouns? That I don't like.
Probably about a month ago, I was out to dinner with 3 friends who are all, adult human female people, right? And then another individual who is a coworker and a friend of one of those women came along with us because he was at an event that we were at prior to going to dinner. And so we just like invited him to come along. And in the process of dinner, we all learned for the first time that his brother, about a year ago, started identifying as a woman, and it got very dicey. And he wasn't militant about it. And because he was so willing to hear what we had to say about it, I and myself and everybody at the table was much more willing to say, I will call them your sibling instead of your brother, or I will call them or they instead of he, but I will not call them she. I will not call them your sister. Like that's where we drew the line. It's kind of like being willing to work with people when they're willing to work with you.
So I have something about that, because whenever I remember being around like a lot of very open, prominent, like very much I see some pro-lesbian accounts, and then sometimes one of the things I'm like, I'll just give and take on. One of the things I'll give and take, but one thing I always would think about is how much do I really want to work with somebody who puts like not just pronouns in bio, but like she, they in bio, and they're pro-lesbian. And one instance is that, or even one instance, actually at my job, there was a video for anti-harassment, and a lot of it did talk about like actually it's not harassing, a gay man with a husband. Or like in one case, there was a non-binary worker who was obviously just a trans-identified female, and how much it would go to correct the older woman who thought that non-binary is just all a trend. And how much would I really want to work with that? And what do I really do about that? That's something that I find it to be something that I can work around, just as long as I keep my head down and, work, because that's not something I deal with at work a lot. But it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming the amount of times you have to think about that.
I would agree, because to me, what you're describing sounds very much like a militant application of the TQ plus ideology, because it is an ideology, right? We're talking science versus ideological belief in how you feel, right? And how much weight that holds. And I think that that's an ideology. It just like any religion, if you were in a history class talking about ancient Israel, you couldn't require a Muslim student to refer to any historical text that refers to Jesus as the Messiah, because ideologically they don't believe that he is the Messiah. Like I ideologically, I do not agree that non-binary is a thing. It doesn't exist in my view. And so I think in a workplace that constantly pushes that and villainizes anybody who doesn't agree with that ideology is something that is purity to a militant stance, to a militant point, and that's something that I can't work with. Whereas if you can kind of avoid clashes, I can work around it.
So I was at this event called Let Women Speak in Austin, Texas. And I was there as a lesbian, obviously, and a woman, obviously. I gave a speech alongside a number of other women. I want to say it was like 10, maybe. And it was really, really profound, the diversity of backgrounds that each woman came from, and how radically different our world views all were. But we were united by this belief or conviction, rather, that the word woman means adult human female, and that we as human females deserve to have single sex spaces. And we were all able to come together, conservative women, liberal women, Christian women, Jews, atheists. I'm not sure if we had any Muslims there. Business women and artists and writers, and just a whole host of different backgrounds. And it was something for me to stand right next to a Christian conservative woman, each of us holding a sign for women's rights. And I, as a lesbian, explained to her, how this ideology that she and I were both against actually hurts me as a lesbian specifically too, because as I explained to her, we're having to let men in our lesbian spaces. And she completely, nodded her head, understanding, that sort of pressure, but it had never occurred to her, that it could impact lesbians and bisexual women seeking homosexual community. And the thing that stood out to me was we were watching the Pride Parade, and this Christian conservative woman saw a marching band full of, it was like middle schoolers, and they all had rainbow stuff on. It was like a very indoctrination-y, I had never seen children from a public school, mind you, taking part in a freaking Pride Parade. That was insane to me. But so she mentioned to me, she was like, Sylvia, is, this indoctrination, like it's, they're teaching these kids all of these things. And I could feel her kind of teetering on the, like, I don't want them to learn about gay people either. And I just said to her, I was like, yeah, I believe that if it's a public school, we need to keep it secular. If you believe that men can become women and that women can become men, that's a faith-based belief, and you have the right to teach your child your faith, but keep it out of public school. Just like I don't want there to be prayer circles in public schools, because public schools need to be secular. And I think this Christian conservative lady had never thought of it that way, and was kind of, because in her mind, she's like, what's the wrong with having Jesus prayer circles before class? I'd love that, but I think for her to be able to understand, okay, well, if I don't want the rainbow religion in public schools, then I have to be consistent and say, I won't push to have my Christian religion in public schools. And now I don't know if she's going to take that step, but it was just being able to have that conversation with someone who came from a totally different background, uniting over this common goal, and then her being able to see a different perspective, I think was really important. And it was a very profound moment for me too, to be so close with someone who I knew was uncomfortable being near me. But we got through it. And I think by the end we were laughing together and gave each other a hug. And I hope that good things come from that. Anyway, all this to say, coalition building is important.
I think that's an amazing example of just how much being willing to do some coalition building can make progress, right? Because if you're willing to talk to people that have this thing in common with you, but differ with you on other things, we can kind of build just through conversation and just knowing people, a better understanding of where everybody's coming from, and maybe some more tolerance for other things. I also think that when you're building coalitions with these groups, I think there is an intense purity culture that gays are leftists, right? Like we have to be. And frankly, that's just not the truth anymore. I don't know that it ever was, but it's definitely not the truth now. And I will go as far to say as I know myself, and I know many others, I can't speak for everyone, in the gay community, but myself and many I know in the gay community feel very abandoned by the left because of this authoritarian TQ plus takeover and the rainbow religion. And I think being able to build coalitions with people on the other side of the aisle too helps them to understand that the rainbow, like we're not, the LGB is not, I believe a man can become a woman. It actually, and that way it hurts us. And we're not all the same, you know, like just, gay people are not here to indoctrinate your children. Like, I think, you know, being able to find this common ground and step across the aisle and build those spaces with people also helps us on that front.
Building on that, Elise, when it comes to kids, especially girls in today's times, I think if, let's say, a girl likes sports or she's not very girly, I think a lot of times people try to put in her head, well, maybe you're really a boy or maybe you're non-binary, and they're actually reinforcing the idea of denying her womanhood. And that's not really very feminist, to deny your womanhood just because you don't fit an ideology of what they think women should be. You're putting this false statement and making her believe that something is wrong with her body and that she needs to change, when in actuality, she should love herself the way she is.
He wrote a very, very good piece that is on the Substack on this topic, and gives some really good examples in that. So I just want to throw that out there while we're on that.
Thank you.
What's the name of the piece?
Embracing biological realities.
I'm glad that I was, born with a majority, somewhat Jehovah's Witness Black mother who just was a tomboy. And even she understands that this stuff is going too far. And, she has a gay eldest son, a lesbian younger daughter, and a lesbian sister. So who we all believe in the same thing. I know that me and at least my auntie believe in that. So we have this understanding, like even back all the way when I was younger, before I even came out to my mom, I talked to my auntie who knew I was gay, and she was questioning all the pronoun nonsense to this point. Even still, I'm glad that I'm just simply a tomboy lesbian, rather than having been born a couple years later and being indoctrinated onto like Instagram and TikTok and calling myself different ridiculous pronouns and mutilating my breasts because I had horrible self-esteem, was autistic and bullied, and that my self-esteem manifested into something awful. If you also want to read my article about Trevor's space, where I actually thought about those things, I have a whole manifesto at this point.
And thank you for sharing that. We'll make sure to include both your article, Kai, and T's article in the comment section for people to read. And one thing that I'm getting from what both of you said, T and Kai, is in some sense your side, quote unquote, their idea of purity is often very harmful to you, while as the other side, quote unquote, often surprisingly has ideas that can be aligned with yours. Like, you made a point about having sort of Jehovah's Witness mother who knows what a tomboy is, and no, that doesn't mean that a tomboy is an actual boy. While as, you know, to your point you brought up about there's nothing feminist about this. A lot of feminist organizations, it's ridiculous to think that they are endorsing this. And so their idea of purity, that you have to be in line with a certain gender ideology, it's not even internally consistent with their own philosophy.
Exactly. It's denying womanhood in a way. Even let's say a woman that claims she's non-binary saying, "Oh, I'm not a woman." It's like you're denying who you are and who you know you are to sacrifice yourself for an ideology.
So I think you made an excellent point that like this ideology that rejects biological sex. By the way, T's article is called "Sex, Sexual Orientation, and the LGB Community: Embracing Biological Realities." She talks about this further in the piece on Substack. But I think you both make very good points that like I think a lot of gay adults and bisexual adults are people that, you know, women that were tomboys as kids and men who were more effeminate boys growing up. And if we were children today, a lot of us would have gone through this ideological indoctrination because that's the only way we could have found acceptance in this community, because there is such a dogmatic view of purity that if you are to be accepted, you have to believe in this ideology. And if you don't, then you're wrong and you are not part of our community. And in reality, that ideology is very harmful to the LGBT community. And in reality, people that you wouldn't expect to be beneficial to LGBT youth or adults like Kai, your mom, are, because they know a tomboy is a tomboy and it's not somebody who was born in the wrong body.
And just sharing one anecdote I have that reminds me of what Sylvia was talking about, but there's a local Bay Area, a San Francisco Bay Area based organization called the Center for Bioethics and Culture. And they originally started with critiquing fertility tech. So they actually had a lot of support from feminists, but they also had a lot of support from conservative Christians. And I've been to a couple of their events, and it is very interesting, an interesting crowd of some very conservative religious people and a lot of feminists and lesbians. And I think it's great that there can be spaces like that. And I think within, sometimes I feel like within the LGBT community, we should do a better job at not trying to shun people because they have the wrong political beliefs. I know a lot of gay conservatives and bisexual conservatives have long complained about that. So
I would also like to say, just touching on being willing to step to the other side, I saw a post the other day, and there's now a term being thrown around that I've seen, like it's the transsexuals, and these are people, adults who transitioned decades ago, who are very they are very gender critical. Like they are very much in the mindset they're stating, you know, like, I have gender dysphoria. This does not mean I was born in the wrong body. This does not, you know, like, this means I have a mental health condition, and this is what was available to me to help with it. It doesn't make me entitled to other people's spaces. And I saw a video from one of these individuals who literally, you know, it was a picture, it was a video of them. It's a male who transitioned to female in a bathroom, and says, when I need to go to the bathroom in a public place, I go to the men's room, because the stereotype that the men's room is dangerous for post-op transsexuals is false. And women need and deserve their own spaces. So I go to the little post-op transsexuals room. So I think even on that end of things, like, not even just, you know, Democratic to conservative, even if we're talking, you know, within this hodgepodge of things, I think it's just very important to not be so dogmatically pure and keep your eyes open and realize that people from all different walks of life can be beneficial when you're building a coalition and have things to offer and have perspectives to offer that are helpful.
Yeah, I think, and I know we have to wrap up soon, but just, you know, when you see someone who is just really rubbing you the wrong way, or at least I should say, when I see someone who's just, I'm like, what are you doing? I try to then take a step back and be like, okay, what's something that this person and I would see eye to eye on? There is got to be at least one thing, even if the one thing is that dogs are great. And, you know, if I'm sure there's probably more deeper topics that I could agree with on people, but I think if we all could just be like, what is something that we all want to make better in this world, and try to tap into that first before then just being like, this person is terrible. It's not easy though. Trust me, it's not easy.
But finding that one thing, even if it's just dogs are great, can give you a space to have deeper discussions somewhere where each of you is willing to listen and hear and learn something and, you know, build that bridge.
Because everyone needs to learn. Everyone can always improve. I think the world would be a lot better of a place if we all just listened more and listened with intent. That's all I want to close out with.
T, you have any closing thoughts?
My final closing thoughts are, I mean, for me personally, I am a Christian and I'm also a bisexual woman. And I had always thought for many years wanting to be about protecting women's spaces. I always thought that was more of my feminist side. And now I feel like it resonates like in the outer world more with Christian women than with, let's say, the TQ plus crowd. With the TQ plus crowd, it's sort of like let's become so inclusive that nobody has their own lane anymore. We're all just one lane. Let's squish everybody together, and there's no room to express our differences. There's no way to acknowledge who we all are as individuals.
And that's all very well said. Beautiful closing thoughts to end on. Thank you, everyone, for participating in this discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks for hosting it.
Thank you. Thanks for watching, for those of you who did and listening.
Yeah. See you next time.